Good evening. Good evening. Can you hear me in the back? Okay, great. Well, thank you for being here this evening. I'm Diane Kresh. I'm director of Arlington Public Library, and it just so happens you are, well, thank you. I'll take that, thank you. And you happen to be here in the middle of National Library Week. This is our time to take a moment, take a pause, and celebrate the value of libraries, all libraries, public libraries, every kind of libraries. Libraries as purveyors of truth, preservers of stories, and guardians of third places where all are welcome. So thank you for being here. Before we get started, a couple of housekeeping rules. Please silence devices. In the case of an emergency, there are emergency exits. Isn't this what they do on planes? Yeah. I think I did that pretty well. Okay, great. Let's see. And I'd like to say a few thank yous. We have the Friends of Arlington Public Library here. Yay. You may not know this, they pay for all library programming. None of it comes from the county. None of it. All of it. We are so grateful to what they do. I don't know how many of you maybe went to the book sale over the weekend. How many of you brought home more than you expected? It's Arlington's longest running recycling program. But all of that money that they earn comes back to the library. And without their support, we would not be able to have evenings like these where we're able to come together and talk about issues and celebrate authors and reading and lifelong learning. So thank you all for your support of the Friends, and thank you all for being here this evening. Thanks too to One More Page Books in the lobby. Arlington's only independent bookstore. We love independent bookstores. Eileen and her team are terrific to work with. Not only can you get books, you can get chocolate and wine. Why not? All right, so, and thank you to my staff. They make all of this look really easy and polished. If it were up to me, it would not look like this. We would have fun, but it wouldn't look like this. So thank you. They put a lot of hours in making these events both professional and polished and fun, and thank you to the programming team and all of the other staff. This year I was persuaded by the staff to take a chance on love and invite romance authors for our annual series. How many of you were at Julia Quinn? Yeah, okay, Julia Quinn. I have not read Julia Quinn, which is why they asked me to take a chance, but it was a terrific evening. And our theme, Share the Love, celebrates love in all of its manifestations and gives each of us the opportunity to get out of ourselves and into the hearts and minds of others. We kicked off the series, as I said, with Julia Quinn, author of the Bridgerton novels. Casey McQuiston, author of One Last Stop and Red, White, and Royal Blue, will join us in August. David and Nicola Yoon will join us in November to talk about writing and publishing romance. And throughout the year, we're also celebrating love in the community. We're hosting our third Human Library event this weekend. How many of you have been to that before? It's a terrific opportunity to really kind of not only empathize, but walk in someone else's shoes for a bit and really understand the life that they are leading. Next month, we're also hosting a community-wide picnic and joining fair in Quincy Park. We showed the movie Join or Die last month. How many have seen that? It's great. It's free on Netflix. Hoo, yay. How many remember Bowling Alone, the Robert Putnam? A few more hands. Okay, well, it's a continuation of that analysis of community life. And so we're hosting a series of events. We had a community conversation a couple of weeks where people came to talk about clubs and associations and joining. We'll have a picnic and then a series of other events. So we're very excited about Join or Die. And what else do I have? Summer reading is going to happen, and one of the things we're most excited about, how many know that we're having a wedding here in July? Yeah. Pretty exciting, a library first, might be the last, but it's been terrific. We had 50 couples compete, if you will, for sharing their story, their love story with the library. And the winning couple is going to have the wedding here in July 12. And they are very excited about it. It's Katie and Vincent. Katie and Vincent. Katie in particular is very excited about standing at the door and welcoming people to the community wedding. So everybody who's in the library that day, or if you weren't planning to be in the library that day, you'll maybe want to be in the library that day, can be a part of the wedding. So it'll be great fun and an opportunity to celebrate their personal story. Tonight, we share the love with Curtis Sittenfeld. Her breakout novel, her debut novel, was the campus story Prep. Yay! How many years ago did that come out? Seems like yesterday, but it was 20 years ago, so congratulations. She's also written a modern retelling of Pride and Prejudice called Eligible, and manages always to have her fingers on the zeitgeist of what's happening in the world, in the community, in romance, in relationships among people. Her books have been selected by the New York Times, Time, Entertainment Weekly, and People for their 10 best books of the year lists. They've also been optioned for television and film and translated into 30 languages. Her nonfiction has appeared in the New York Times, Vanity Fair, The Atlantic. Her work is wry, observational, warm-hearted, and it really speaks to our moment. And if you read romantic comedy, you'll find out. If you haven't read it yet, no spoilers, but you'll understand more of what I'm talking about. A graduate of Stanford University and the Iowa Writers Workshop, Curtis has interviewed Michelle Obama for Time magazine, appeared as a guest on NPR's Fresh Air, CBS's Early Show, and the PBS NewsHour, and best of all, has been a Jeopardy answer 5 times. A native of Cincinnati, she currently lives with her family in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Please share the love with Curtis Sittenfeld.
I guess we can tell by, does it seem on? Okay.
Okay, mine says on, right? Hello? Yes. Hello. Okay. All right, you can hear me, right? Yes. Okay. It could be a little hotter, oh, no, maybe not. Okay. I'm a professional.
I know, by the way, I have to say thank you. That was such a lovely introduction. And I kind of want to attend Katie and Vincent's wedding. On July 12th.
Katie would be fine with it. Yeah.
I know, apparently.
Yeah. No, she was super excited about it. So I'll be officiating. I know. Who knew? So nice side hustle. All right, so here we are, Prep, 20 years later. Let's start a little bit with that, because that was the debut. And a huge success. I read it and loved it. And thoughts on Prep at the time, and then now 20 years later, your thoughts about it?
Well, it's funny because I was, at the time Prep was published in January 2005, I was a teacher at St. Albans in Washington, D.C., the boys' prep school. I was a part-time English teacher. So I had gone there in '02 to be their writer in residence, which I mentioned this earlier today, means living in the dorm, but having my own bathroom, but sometimes watching Jeopardy with the boys actually in the dorm, in the common room. So it's funny because the way that I see it now, Prep was a surprise bestseller, which I think I didn't even understand that it basically means the publisher did not buy it for an enormous amount of money, and they did not decide at the time that they bought it that they would definitely heavily promote it, which a disproportionate number of best-selling books. That's how it, like the author gets, a $500,000 advance, and it's very clear it's going to be pushed. It got a $40,000 advance, which is, it's not like I had worked on it for 3 years, so it's if you do the math, but also like I know people, like I know a writer today could get, like if somebody said I got a book deal for $10,000, like I would think actually that's good. Like publishing is so wild, not even so. Okay, so that's, but the way I feel now about the publication experience is that I think I can kind of contextualize it. Or I was 29 at the time. I think that probably most first novelists, or just maybe all writers, without even realizing it, have a sort of movie version in their head of what it's going to be like to be a writer. And the crazy thing is I actually got to experience it. And then I kind of quickly followed up with like a sophomore slump or whatever. So I kind of, I sullied it a little bit, but I did get to have, and at this point, I don't know if I should say this or if I should not say this, but which obviously means I'm about to say it, but I sometimes feel, 20 years on, that I've been like so lucky for so long that it's a little like icky or disgusting, and I think of myself as like I'm like the Gwyneth Paltrow of novelists or something, where you're So I don't. Maybe I shouldn't say that. You can
say it with me. Fine. We got together earlier today to do an event over at Marymount with the students, which was terrific. But I told Curtis in the car on the way over that she's among 3 writers that when her books come out, I read them. And the other 2 are Ann Patchett and Elizabeth Strout. And there's just something about how they talk about women and women issues and relationships. And it's funny, but it's also very touching. And it just feels like, I could know these people, which is exciting. So let's talk about romantic comedy. Origin story first, and then we'd like you to read a little bit. But where did the idea come from? And it's so interesting because it's clearly based on Saturday Night Live, and I'm old enough to be first generation Saturday Night Live with the Killer Bees and John Belushi and all those people. So where did you get the idea to write a book about a sketch comedy series?
Well, by the way, I think I got so overexcited about Katie and Vincent's wedding. I forgot to say I'm so happy to be here. I love libraries. I can tell that this is like a extra special one. I love libraries because it's like they're filled with books, but then also they're like such forces of good in their communities, and there's so many other things that go on in them. So I'm. And also, I don't know how many entrances there are, but make sure you go out the one where there's a huge picture of me and the other writers on the window. It's amazing. There's a really amazing level of detail. So I'm so happy to be in conversation with Diane. Okay, so the origin story of romantic comedy is that I have kids who are now 14 and 16. So 5 years ago, actually in like maybe December 2019, I sort of introduced them to SNL, like semi-intentionally, semi-unintentionally, and then it became sort of our family's go-to pandemic TV show. And we were watching it kind of in reverse chronological order. So it was a lot of Kate McKinnon, Aidy Bryant, like starting in the last episodes of 2019, 2020, and then going backwards. And I would think to myself as we watched, someone should write a screenplay for a romantic comedy about this pattern or phenomenon on the show where like super famous talented women who are household names come on the show as a musical guest or a guest host and end up dating or marrying cast members or writers who are talented men, but are sort of like mortal or ordinary, or they're not like transcendent, or they're not glowing or something. And like how it seems like that pattern would never happen if it was, you know, a wildly gorgeous, successful male celebrity and a female writer. And then a few months passed, and I actually, you know, there was the pandemic, and I was writing another book and I'd sort of meant to write a fun book, and I realized it wasn't that fun. And then I thought to myself, oh, like that screenplay should be a novel, and that person who writes it should maybe be me. And
Now, did you have like Pete Davidson in mind, or?
Well, I will answer this by saying in 2020 I had this novel Rodham that was this like a alternate history. Thank you. If Hillary Clinton had not married Bill Clinton, and I will say that when I was promoting that book, I would do events, and they were on Zoom actually, but the central question was like, will a woman ever be elected president? And then when I was promoting romantic comedy, the central question was like, if Pete Davidson wanted to date you, would you? And I went like, there's something so, I mean, I'm glad to write both kinds of books, but like there was a big, I think, so Pete Davidson is the most conspicuous example of this and has dated the most widely. There's Colin Jost, who has been the head writer forever, and co-hosts Weekend Update with Michael Che, who's married to Scarlett Johansson. For some reason, I always blank on, it's Emma Stone is married to someone named Dave McCary or Dave McCory. The fact that I don't know, even though I wrote this book and have mentioned this, sort of illustrates my point, but so they're not, it's not Pete Davidson alone, although, and also I will say, if Pete Davidson wanted to date me, I totally would. I mean, he's not like my dream, but I see why he's appealing.
So when we talk about the book, so many people talk about the section with the emails. And in fact, I was talking to a young lady in the front row here who said it was her favorite part of the book. So I realized the book was sort of your pandemic novel, but talk a little bit about your use of email, and because it's actually perfect.
Well, there were a few reasons that the emails were. So the premise is, if you haven't read it, what's basically, as I described, like a female writer for a show like SNL, is sort of writes a sketch making fun of this phenomenon, and then that week, the person who's both the musical guest and the guest host he's referred to sometimes in reviews as like an aging pop star. He's like, 15 years younger than I am now, but he's in his late 30s. The woman, Sally, is like, I think we have chemistry, but how could this smoking hot celebrity have chemistry with me? And then they sort of have a weird conversation that goes off the rails at the after party. And then 2 years pass, and during the pandemic, he reaches out to her by email. So it appealed to me because I thought, if you have only the email and not Sally's interpretation of the email, then the reader will experience it exactly as the characters do. So like, is that sentence flirtatious or not flirtatious? And if that sentence is flirtatious, should I sort of like raise the stakes, or should I like back away and like, ooh, like that, I wish I hadn't said that, but I already hit send, and like, so it's supposed to be, but it's funny because both, I love my editor and I love my agent, and both of them, they're very supportive in terms of like letting me follow my path or whatever. But I told them my sort of structural vision, and the email, they were kind of like, we look forward to seeing that, Curtis. And to me, and then they ended up liking it, and a lot of people, it is their favorite section. And I think, of course, like, it's people's favorite. Like, who would, like, if anyone in this room said to me, almost like I have letters that, like, you know, my now spouse and I wrote to each other like 50 years ago. And like, do you want to read them? I would be like, I definitely want to read. I mean, or like fictional people, real people, like to sort of observe two people. Like even I think the New York Times actually did something not long ago that was people's opening texts in terms of now, and like one person sent a text. I swear it was like this long, but like they're now a couple. You know, so it's like it's very interesting.
Well, it's super clever, and it's a great way to advance the story. But it also, when I was reading it, reminded me of Visit from the Goon Squad from many years ago, where Egan used PowerPoint to tell the story of one of the characters. So if you haven't read that, it's another example of using contemporary tools, if you will, to advance the story, and it's really good.
Wait, I'll tell you a fun little tidbit. When I was like shortly before, just a few days before my 17th birthday, I won 17 Magazine's fiction contest, and the person who was the judge who picked my story was Jennifer Egan.
Of course. Let's have an applause. That's great. That's super.
Wait, actually, I'll tell you. I know her. Like, I don't know her super well, but I really admire. I mean, I think she's such a smart, interesting writer. And another tidbit. I mean, I heard her speak. I've met her a bunch of times, but I heard her speak this is probably going back to like 2006 or 7. And she said something that I feel like is kind of like a guiding principle for me, which was, she said, I wouldn't want to, this is a paraphrasing, but I wouldn't want to write a book that I knew from the outset I was capable of pulling off. And I kind of feel like that captures something to me about like I want to feel challenged by my own book.
Right. So I've listened to interviews you've done where you talk a lot about structure and how enamored of structure. So let's take a minute to talk about structure and how important it is to you as a novelist.
Well, I was very influenced. So I attended the Iowa Writers Workshop, which I entered on my 24th birthday, half a lifetime ago, and half of my lifetime ago, maybe not necessarily yours, and my advisor was Ethan Kanan, who, you know, is a novelist and short story writer, and he had like an early short story bestseller while he was at Harvard Medical School, you know, like in the late 80s. And some people are too talented in too many ways, but he was obsessed with structure. And so he would, in our writing workshops, if somebody turned in a short story, he would say, okay, and this is a little different now, as some of you might know, but the writer herself would be completely silent, and her classmates would be discussing it. And first you would talk about structure and nothing else. Then you would talk about character and nothing else. Then you would talk about language and nothing else. And then if you had other things to say, you could, but almost always they had all fallen into one of those categories. And structure was kind of, it's just like the order of the scenes, what information you reveal early, what you withhold, what you depict in scene, what you summarize. And it gave me the feeling of having control over my own writing. And whereas before I was his student, I had kind of felt like if something turns out well, it's good luck, and if something turns out badly, it's bad luck. And then years later, I did an event with him for one of his novels, and I was the Diane and he was the Curtis, and I was kind of asking him, and I had always assumed that because some of his books were optioned and made into movies, that was where he kind of got his interest in structure. And he said it was actually based on his engineering degree from Stanford. And I was like, my writing career is based on Ethan Kanan's engineering degree. Like, it was very disorienting, but I still sort of swear by it as an organizing principle.
Now, do you know where the novel is going to go when you start?
I outline. All so right. I don't know if you have a sort of estimate of this, but I feel like 75% of fiction writers do not outline. I don't know. Do you have any?
Well, actually, most of the ones we've featured here at Arlington Reads, don't. Yeah. I mean, in fact, Elizabeth Strout talked about sticking Post-its all over and just sort of grabbing them and starting to tell the story.
That's not what I do. It's actually a lot of people in the sort of writing community will call it being like a pantser, which is like flying by the seat of your pants. The outliners and pantsers.
Mm-hmm. And you also go back and forth, novels and short stories. And is that you feel like you need a palate cleanser after? Okay.
Actually, sometimes, yeah. So I mean, sometimes I'll just have an idea, and I know it's kind of like a fleeting idea or like a little moment, and so I know it's a story as opposed to feeling like something I could sink my teeth into for 3 years or something, and then it's a novel. But there's two ways that I sort of use, and I have like lots of ideas, you know, like I probably have a list of like 20 stories. I mean, sometimes if I'm bored or whatever, I'll like make lists of ideas. But I sort of, sometimes if I haven't written for maybe a few weeks or months because just of like life things happening, sometimes I write a story almost to get back in the habit of writing without feeling like I've taken on something so huge. Or sometimes exactly like a palate cleanser, like it's almost like I, you know, like maybe I want to be writing. Like I think I'm just sort of a like it's almost like a self-soothing thing, which is very weird to have your career and your self-soothing technique be like the same thing. Like there's pros and cons. I mean, there's more pros than cons, but there are some cons. But yeah, like it's almost like I don't want to start another novel because that's such a huge project, but I want to be writing, so then I'll write a story.
And you told the students this afternoon that you like to print out as you go.
Yeah. I mean, partly, I think, I mentioned to the students that my children will say that like I'm so old that I don't use Google Docs, like I use Word still. But so partly the printing out thing is just to like almost have the security of like it exists and I'm not going to lose it as a file. But I definitely, I just like, you know, paper, and yeah, maybe that's why I like libraries.
Well, does it also give you a sense of like achievement, like I've
yeah, absolutely.
Right.
And it like it sort of starts to turn into a novel. I mean, because there is something where you're printing, you know, just like pages at your house, and it's very different from this. It doesn't feel like a real book for quite a while.
And how much do you rewrite or redraft?
A lot.
Okay.
I mean, but it also varies. So there could be, like, let's say there are, like, I would consider a scene to be whatever falls between kind of like space breaks on the page or like any, you know, and then it's like, if it's a shift in time or place, it's a new scene. So let's say there are like 5 scenes in 15 pages or something like that. It could be that one of them I revised 7 times and one I wrote pretty much once.
Wow.
And so it just, it's hard to know like what will be challenging, or like, of course, sometimes I think I'm writing the beginning of a book and I'm actually writing like page 40, you know, you sort of, and so I outline, but I definitely revise my outline too, and have flexibility. Like sometimes I'll think of it almost like as if I'm going on a trip or something, and it would be like if you said, today I'm going to like go to this museum, but you don't really know what you're going to do inside the museum, or today I'm going to go hike, but it's not, you don't already know what bird you're going to see or something like that.
Okay. Let's read a little bit from romantic comedy. How many have actually read it? Or wow. Okay. All right.
Shocking. That's great. You too can say whether you date Pete Davidson. Okay, wait, I was thinking I usually read from the beginning, I think. Okay. Or should I read some like
your
kissing
choice.
or something, since it's like romance? Romance. Let's see. Wait, let me see if I can find this again, because I almost always read from the beginning, but so many of you have read. Okay, let's see. Maybe I'll read their conversation. This is at the after party, before it turns bad, when it's okay. Okay. So the show, you know, Noah and Sally have sort of been working together intermittently during the week, and now they're at the after party. And also, Sally has had a little bit to drink, and Noah is sober in life and sober at this party. Okay, so she's saying like, oh, you did a good job, and okay. You get credit, I said. It's all in the delivery. Tipsiness notwithstanding, I already was aware of monopolizing a celebrity's time when I was no longer professionally useful. This was when Noah said, now will you admit you've never really listened to my music? I genuinely laughed. If I hadn't, how would I have written this sketch? Also, I'm a human being in the world. Do you think there's any man, woman, or child who hasn't heard Making Love in July while lying in the chair at the dentist's office? Yeah, exactly, he said. I mean that you haven't listened beyond the bare minimum. You haven't listened on purpose. He still seemed to be good-naturedly teasing as opposing to needily grasping for a compliment. Also not true, I said. I love the Bishop's Garden. By the way, I can say Noah clearly went to St. Albans, although it's never mentioned. I love the Bishop's Garden and all regrets. He squinted a little, scrutinizing me. Here's what I'll admit, I said. There are two categories of pop songs I'm not crazy about. And because Making Love in July, through no fault of its own, is in one of the categories, it biased me against you early on. I mean, almost 20 years ago, but I've realized that I underestimated the range of your oeuvre. I paused again. What kind of asshole do you think uses the word oeuvre in a bar at 3 a.m? He said, just guessing, but maybe an asshole who went to Harvard. No, I said, I'm not one of TNO's Harvard assholes. Where'd you go? Duke, I said. This time his smile was more sarcastic. As in the world-famous University in North Carolina? Do you mean that, Duke? Okay, should I stop or should I keep going?
What do you think? Keep going.
I feel like we need to get to like a sort of more juicy part. Okay, wait. Okay, okay, wait. It's maybe you can tell I've never read this section out loud before. Okay, so okay, he says she's talking about songs she likes, and then he says songs she hates, which are about like people saying like, kind of like, you know, I hated you, but like we're still married or whatever, like we've made it. And he says, the thing is, I'm pretty sure I've never written that kind of song, partly because I've never been married. Oh, sorry, I said. Making Love in July is the other kind of song I was referring to. It's in the second category. The kind is always a man singing to a woman, and it's like, baby, you don't know how beautiful you are. You're so perfect. I never thought I'd find this. Am I in heaven? Noah looked both amused and uncertain. What's wrong with baby, you're so perfect? I never thought I'd find this. Am I in heaven? At an almost subliminal level, I found it gratifying that I'd tricked Noah Brewster into saying to me while we stood a foot apart, baby, you're so perfect. I never thought I'd find this. Am I in heaven? I said, I don't like the you don't know how beautiful you are part. It makes it seem like the love is predicated either on a lack of awareness on the woman's part or else on her being insecure. And the woman in the songs is often both a child and a sexy enchantress. So the lyrics might as well be, I'm attracted to you because you conform to the standards agreed upon to be desirable at this moment in human history. But you don't even know it, and your cluelessness is what makes me feel like a real man. And then he asks if she's ever been in love.
Okay, yeah. Great, thank you. That's terrific. So as I was reading, the Sally, I had that sense that she's very accomplished in her own field. She's funny, she's clever, she's well-regarded, and then in the rest of her life, not so much. And I kept thinking imposter syndrome, like, I'm not the kind of girl this great guy would be in love with. And that pretty much, you keep kind of picking at that throughout the whole novel until she gets to a place where I think, self-acceptance begins. But that was conscious on your part?
Yeah, I mean, yes, although it's funny. So I do get, feedback from my books where sometimes people will say, Like I was very frustrated by this character, Sally specifically, but a lot. Like, and like she was very self-sabotaging, and I wanted to shake her shoulders. And then people will say, like, I felt like you were inside my brain, and that I think what you're describing is totally accurate, and I think it's very normal for adults to be like very competent in some areas and very not. And so it can be like a very professionally successful person who like cries at the dentist or like can't drive on the highway or whatever. I mean, like those things seem totally normal to me. I mean, partly I think writers are very open about their neuroses or whatever. So yes, she's like that, and I don't see it as weird.
Mm-hmm. The characters, moving on from this one, you've written about Lee Fiora and Laura Bush and Hillary, and now, of course, Sally and several others. And is there a through line that kind of connects these women characters? Have you ever thought about it in that way?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's actually, as the years have... Turn this off, did I? It's still on. Okay. I think it took me a long time to realize this, but I think that something I really like to write about is, I mean, I certainly write about women more than men, or from the perspective of women more than men, but I like to write about a smart person who is wrong about their life or wrong about their beliefs. And to me, that's the most interesting. It's much more interesting than like a foolish person who's right or wrong, or a smart person who's right. Like it's the most almost complicated combination. And yeah, so I think that or like I would never write from the perspective of a person, like especially like who I didn't have some compassion for, or who I detested, partly because I'm kind of like spending time in the company of a character while I'm writing the book.
And one of the students, I think, asked you this afternoon, did you ever get sick of a character? Which I thought was interesting. I mean,
that's a good question.
You spend so much time. I mean, most of your books are quite lengthy, and
thank you for noticing.
Yeah. But it's you're spending 2, 3, 4 years on it. It's 500 pages. It's a lot of that character, and how do you keep it fresh and interesting so that? Yeah, I'm excited about this book, and I want other people to share it with me.
Well, I mean, I am my own sort of first reader, so sometimes when I'm reading out those printed pages, I'll almost like get to a paragraph and be like, oh, like I'm gonna skip over that because that's boring. And then I'm like, Curtis, cut it. Like you have control over that, so it's like I do wanna entertain myself. And like actually Ann Patchett, one of your 3 favorite writers, there's a line in her memoir, Truth and Beauty, like sort of her
Yes.
memoir of her friendship with Lucy Greeley, that talks about if you're a writer, your writing can be like the tea or the friend that you have tea with in the afternoon. And I feel that way, that it is like I'm so lucky that I can kind of create my own entertainment. And I think I have felt increasing consciousness of this sort of over the years, but it really, like, above all during, like, I started writing romantic comedy in August 2021, that I was like, this is my pandemic escape, and that I get to choose the imaginary world I live in. I don't get to choose that world I live in, but I get to choose the fictional world I live in, and like I should choose very carefully.
Right. So prep. We meet Lee Fiora, who is like, 14 years old when she goes off to the private school. And then you brought her back, which, not really a spoiler alert, but the final story in the latest collection features Lee at a later stage of her life.
Her 30th boarding school reunion. It's an enticement, not a spoiler alert. Like, it's like
enticement.
It's supposed to lure you into buying a short story collection, even though you think you don't like short stories.
It's a great collection, and the story, I was just delighted because I, of course, wasn't expecting it. I was just reading along, and oh yeah, it's her again. So, what prompted that?
So at one point, I had thought, like, do I have an entire prep sequel inside me? And my editor, who I've now worked with the same editor for 13 years, so she wasn't the prep editor, but she said, And she works with like really huge writers like Jodi Picoult. But she said, I don't think you should write a sequel because I think people have such a special place in their heart for that book and such a special relationship that essentially like you could displease like a lot of readers in a lot of different ways. And I think she was right. And actually, I kind of got a glimpse of that weirdly. So American Wife, my, loosely inspired by Laura Bush book, came out in 2008. And then Rodham came out in 2020. And Rodham is definitely not a sequel to American Wife, but still people couldn't resist comparing them. And as with most comparisons, it was not often flattering. So people were sort of like, almost like, why is Curtis doing this again? And I was like, you cannot like the book, but like I get to decide if I do it again. But it kind of was this glimpse into like how a prep sequel would be treated, but I still felt like, oh, I have a little more left in me, or like I think I might. And writing a story felt very like low stakes. And then when I realized that Show Don't Tell would come out, like 20 years after prep, then it was like, oh, and a 30 year reunion. Like it sort of felt like my fondness for structure made it irresistible.
Well, what I especially liked about it is that how many of us have gone to a reunion with the sole purpose of they're going to see me now as I wasn't then. I'm cool, I'm successful, maybe I'm not, but it's, that kind of thing, right? So my favorite story in this book is Do-Over, which is a similar kind of premise to adults who were in prep school together. Very different backgrounds and experiences, meet for quote unquote a dinner. And it turns out to be a very challenging dinner for the unsuspecting guy on whom the woman had a crush back then. But it was just the same kind of like, this is how we were then, and you wouldn't have looked at me and paid attention to me, and here we are all these years later. That's another incentive here. That's a great story in this book.
If you want to read about aging prep school graduates, you have a lot of options.
Yes.
It's funny that you should mention that story, because I do think that sometimes I'm almost like practicing writing about something, and I kind of think I might have been working up to writing my prep sequel story with that story Do-Over, because again, they're not from the prep universe, but it's very similar. And I actually just had a story on the Atlantic website called Relatable Mom. And I started writing it in the summer of 2021 and set it aside when I started writing romantic comedy. And then I came back to it. And actually, I think that the protagonist she's different from Sally, but there's like this cross-country drive in reverse, and she like works in the TV world and like all these. So I kind of think I was like circling certain preoccupations or interests with both of those.
Right. There's also always a nice little twist in many of these stories too. Like a character will be introduced and, oh my God, she's so, gross and self-absorbed and blah, blah, blah. Somebody I'd never want to be friends with. And then they do something that's incredibly empathetic and warm, and it kind of turns the whole relationship on its head. And I think I had that feeling with the one that you just mentioned, the Relatable, because aren't they both expecting a baby, and the one woman knows everything about?
Oh no, that one is oh no, what's that called? Oh my God, Bad Latch. You're thinking of Bad Latch.
That's another great story.
If you like fiction about breastfeeding, or if you don't, still.
Or if you don't, right? If you want to learn. So when you were I guess from an early age, you wanted to be a writer. And did you, as you grew and developed I guess you were an English major, et cetera, did you have influences, either in terms of content or style or anything like that?
Yeah, well, okay. So I feel like this is like uncomfortable and the truth. Like I was definitely influenced by Alice Munro above all, which if you don't know about the sort of recent kind of information, I highly recommend the New Yorker article by Rachel Aviv, which is so sort of psychologically nuanced and doesn't shy from essentially like the sort of I don't know if scandal is the right tragedy, whatever. But anyway, so I was definitely very influenced by Alice Munro, probably more than any other writer. But when I was in high school, at one point, a teacher said, buy the Best American Short Stories anthology and buy the O. Henry Short Stories anthology. And when I read them, I did just feel like the world was sort of opening up. So it was like obviously there's such a wide variety of short stories in the New Yorker, but like, Charles D'Ambrosio, or like the first time I read Lori Moore or Andrea Lee, or there's so many writers where I just kind of felt like it just felt so sort of interesting and sort of stimulating and challenging, but then also like recognizable as a sensibility or like as a way of observing the world and putting observations into words. And it was so kind of interesting to me.
Yeah, the Munro, I also was a big fan of Alice Munro, and if you haven't read the New Yorker piece, highly recommend. It's thoughtful, it's well done, it's well written. It is tragic. I would call it more tragic than a scandal. But it did give me pause, because we are living in an age where, people get canceled. Yeah. And I think it's hard sometimes to separate, she's a brilliant writer, deserving of the Nobel Prize, et cetera, and yet had this terrible tragedy going on in her life, which then, not coincidentally, influenced her writing and some of her plot lines and characters. And so I continued to struggle with that. And then shortly after that story, there was the story about Neil Gaiman. And so it gets people...
And Cormac McCarthy, yes. The Vanity Fair piece about Cormac. I mean, it's very... I mean, I think about this where even there's... I don't know if I should say this person's name or not, but there's like a singer who I kind of like his music, and he seems like a really bad person. And so sometimes I'm like, well, if I'm in the car by myself, it's fine. And then, but I'm like, but if one of my, but also like, should I not listen on Spotify? But should I not even use Spotify because it's bad for? I mean, these are very confusing issues that I don't. Yeah, I mean, it clearly a person can be talented and have bad judgment, and then they can be talented and be like a really bad person. I mean, beyond what bad judgment.
All of the above. Yeah. And I'm glad you brought it up, because I did think about it at the time, like, ooh, Alice Munro, because she was considered like the patron saint of Canada, and not that there are a lot of writers in Canada.
I mean, there's other Margaret Atwood.
All right, Margaret Atwood.
Miriam Tovis. Yeah,
Robertson Davies. There are.
Yeah.
Okay. So who are you reading now? And we'll do this before we're going to do audience Q&A. Yes. Okay. Who are you reading now?
So I just did an event with the writer Ada Calhoun. For her, she and I were publication twins, and were like close in age and sort of circled each other. And she wrote this novel that it feels very memoir-like, called Crush. Mm-hmm. So, and I read that, and we did this very fun event together. And now I'm reading. She wrote a memoir called Also a Poet. That's about her dad was the New Yorker art critic Peter Sheldall.
Yes.
And he tried to write a biography of the poet Frank O'Hara, and basically Ada found these tapes and decided, like, I'm going to try to finish this project. But so it's almost a memoir of trying to finish the project and of her relationship with like her very talented and not very nice dad. But then they did have some close moments. And actually, I'm listening to the audio, and you hear the tapes of her dad's interviews of like people in the sort of art and literary world from like the 70s, and then you hear like baby Ada on the it's kind of an amazing thing. So that's and another book I read. I don't know, I'm curious if anyone has read this or heard of this. It's a memoir called Leg, like Leg, by someone named Greg Marshall, where he grew up in this big, not Mormon family in Utah. And his parents never told him that he had cerebral palsy. They said, you have tight tendons. So he grew up in this very kind of wacky, funny, sometimes troubled family. And it's kind of like, and he was gay in the 90s, and a lot of it is about sort of like trying to find love. You could invite him for the romance week. But it's kind of like David Sedaris-ish, but almost, I mean, maybe it has different proportions of like moving and funny, but it is very moving and very funny.
Great. It's Leg.
It's something like one of those things where it's like the main title, and then like, you know, the sub is like Leg, the story of a limb and the boy who grew from it. But see, I'm serious. And then great, but remember, like Leg, Greg Marshall.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. So Brittany, you want to set up? All right. So questions. That'd be great. Come up to the mic and ask the question, and Curtis will take it from there.
Amazing. I can't believe I'm first. I have been reading your books for half my life. So just thank you for gracing us with your talent and insight on introspection is how I see it. Like, your characters think a lot. And it's nice to hear you read about how they think about things. I was thinking about asking you about intimacy or race, but I think since we've talked about romance a lot, I'm going to ask you about race, because all of your main characters, have been white women, and I find it amazing that you do sprinkle in race. Like in prep, I distinctly remember, because I was in high school reading that, when being preppy was such a big thing at the time too. And you talked about what someone thought was pubic hair, but it was the curly black hair of a character. And I loved seeing that, and that the main character had empathy. Or in Sisterland, and the fact that one of the characters really just was a bit clueless on the topic. So I'm curious if that's something you're going to explore more. I know you have a short story called White Women, LOL, which is an awesome title. But
Have you read it?
No, but I did my research before I asked the question. Because I was like, I think I read somewhere that you want to talk more about it, but I'm curious how you might want to talk about it more, if you're going to talk about it, but still from the lens of a white woman, which I think would be really interesting.
So I think the question of like, I wasn't sure if you were going to say, like, would I write from the perspective of a person of color? And I wouldn't rule it out. I think that I probably would be likelier to explore race from like a white person's or white character's perspective. And there was an interesting, like I've heard writers of color say there can be this expectation, like a writer of color, which obviously I'm not speaking for all writers of color, but like might say like, whatever they write about, it's perceived as being about race. And then a white person can write about sort of whatever, and it's not perceived as race. And I do think that that's an interesting, or even like sometimes people will talk about the fact that, you know, a lot of times the default for a white writer is to specify the race of characters who aren't white and then not specify. And I feel like I try in general to if I specify race, to sort of do it for whatever race it is or whatever. Even so the story White Women, LOL, is like, I would say it's kind of the word that comes up the most is cringy, and sometimes people will say like full body cringe or whatever. Like, it's definitely you know, again, like I think engages with race and shows sort of white, you know, like awkwardness and whatever. And I did, and it's sort of like a woman finds herself in one of those viral videos. A white woman finds herself in a viral video, although it's more local viral than national viral, where she asked a table of black people. She told them at a restaurant, she said, "Oh, like there's a private party in here," and she didn't know that it was for her friend that the party had ended. So she was kind of telling them to leave a place in the restaurant where it was fine for them to be. And I did feel again that that's sort of like a rancid story or something. And there's a story, it's not specified the way it's not specified that Noah goes to St. Albans, but that clearly takes place in a particular neighborhood in St. Louis. And there's another story that's called The Patron Saints of Middle Age that I see a lot. There's a few stories, not all of them, but a few stories in the collection that I kind of feel like have like a twin. And I feel like The Patron Saints of Middle Age is sort of the twin of White Women, LOL, where it's about it's sort of about friendship or relationships between white and black women. And I think I wanted to include that because I do feel like it's like there are different versions and I like to explore like the different parts of being a middle-aged woman. And so anyway, if you end up reading this, you can let me know what you think.
Yes, I just bought it, so I will definitely let you know what I think. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Thanks so much for being here. Like Dan, I buy your books before they're even published. I pre-order them. And I was really excited to read romantic comedy. And then I realized it was about the pandemic. And I was like, oh God, like this is not what I was expecting. But it was one of the first books I read that had the pandemic in it. And I thought it did it so beautifully. And I finished Show Don't Tell earlier this month and loved it. And there was also a lot of pandemic in that book. And I'm curious if you can just talk about the process of writing about the pandemic, how you did that, how you made a book about because the pandemic's like the whole plot of the book. Oh
my God, anyone who hasn't bought it is going to be like,
no, it's really good. But I'm just curious how you made that into such a great part of the book, because I was really nervous about it.
Well, it's funny. So I think of like the pandemic, like there being kind of references in Show Don't Tell, but maybe only one story where it's a central plot, but maybe I should look more carefully. I mean, it's sort of confusing because I was writing because I started it in August 2021, and I actually started it at exactly the moment when, do you remember that there were like breakthrough cases, I think in like among people who had been vaccinated, because I think it seems hard to remember, but there was a moment when it seemed like you'll be vaccinated and then you can't get COVID. And so I think that I felt like if you set fiction, in or around 2020, and it's realistic fiction, you have to somehow deal with you can sidestep it by setting something in like 2014 or like whatever, like later. But in some ways, I weirdly kind of felt like with romantic comedy, I think that to me, it felt more almost like optimistic or positive or something to show the characters like getting through it. And like they probably actually would never have, found love if not for the pandemic. That I would have almost felt more of a sense of dread as a reader if I was reading this. And it was like, I don't know, like 2019 or something. And they were like, oh, we found each other. We're so happy now or whatever. Like, but I sort of, so I don't know. It doesn't. I don't see this as a pandemic book, but it's you are not alone. And like some people are almost like, oh my God, it should have come with a warning or like it's called. I mean, I knew that when I was like, if I call a book romantic comedy, people will say like it's neither romantic nor comical. And it's like not only did it happen, but it happened, like before publication. So it's like, yeah. Anyway.
Hi, Curtis. I read Show Don't Tell as an arc, and it was such an exciting experience to get that. But one of the first stories in there, one of your stories is about how your characters going and having lunch or dinner with someone they went to grad school with, and they're having this conversation about like, oh, well, you write like chick lit or women's fiction. And I was, I sort of have a sense maybe how your character feels about it, but I was really curious, like, how do you feel about being in that category? As, many women obviously very much enjoy your fiction. And so I'm curious about how you think about it and also how you respond to sort of those, like, oh, well, you just write chick lit or women's fiction.
Well, so it's funny because when prep came out 20 years ago, some people would say like, oh, it's chick lit. And now the term that's used is book club fiction, actually. But it's also, women's fiction is a category, like a sales category or sometimes a category. And I don't, is it a category in this library? Is women's fiction it's kind of preposterous because then it's like, well, what is fiction, right? Like, it doesn't. I think I contributed a story. This is probably in like 2007-ish to an anthology called "This Is Not Chick Lit," which it was, I think, supposed to be sort of fun. These are such. I don't know, it almost seems nostalgic to be having cultural fights about that. But I feel like that it was, I think it's something that can be very like touchy, or like I know even, like obviously romance is a very popular category, a very online community. Romantasy is now really huge. And that I do know when romantic comedy came out 2 years ago, because I'm not primarily a romance writer, that like, like I should be very careful and respectful about, like, I think that people can feel, I don't know, like very protective of their own communities, which I totally understand. So I would say at this point, like, I don't, if somebody was like, you're my favorite chick lit writer, or like sometimes people will be like, it was a guilty pleasure to read, and I'll think like, why guilty? Like, but I don't really care about that stuff. And I feel like I sort of write the books that I want to write. I'm so lucky that like I've had 9 books. Like I have the same publisher. And 2 of them were short story collections. Like, you don't know, not everyone's publisher will let them publish a short story collection. So yeah, like I feel like I write the book that I want to write. I'm super lucky that my publisher will publish it. And then I'm told what it was. Like, oh, you wrote a campus novel. You wrote a romance. And some of it they'll be like, oh, you wrote like fan fiction. Like you wrote Jane Austen fan fiction. I'm kind of like, okay,
When we were planning this series, the staff was very hardcore into romance as the genre. And I wanted you to be here, so we justified it by saying, you're romance adjacent.
It's funny because I don't know. And again, the romance community, there's like all this, there's sort of, if you know this, you might be like, oh, this is cringy to hear Curtis. Just like, you might feel like how my children feel like when I like try to use their slang or whatever. But yeah, I don't know. Like, I wouldn't presume to be part of the community, but if somebody wanted to include me, and I will say I've read romances from a very young, from like the age of like 4th grade or something.
Hey, Curtis, thank you for being here. Thank you for your books. You said earlier in the conversation that you're drawn to writing about smart characters who are wrong about their beliefs. Elizabeth Bennet, what was it like to go into the Jane Austen canon? Or did it really feel like you were writing Jane Austen fan fiction, or what was it like?
I think actually in some ways it did feel like I was writing Jane Austen fanfic. And so even like, I knew from the outset that some people would be like, "You're no Jane Austen." I was like, "Of course I'm no Jane Austen." Like it's or
you're pretty good.
Oh, but my publisher, whenever occasionally, if in a review someone's like, "She's like a modern day Austen," and I feel like like it's like a publicity assistant like gets their wings or whatever. Like it's like they're Random House is so happy. But I think there are serious enough problems in the world that someone saying like, like Jane Austen would be rolling in her grave. I'm like, I don't care if you think that. Like, I mean, it's fine. It's like no book is for everyone. Like, whatever. But it was so a British publisher approached me and they said, we're doing something called the Austen Project, and we're having different writers retell each of Austen's novels, and would you be interested in Pride and Prejudice? And this was actually in 2011. And I did feel like it wouldn't have occurred to me, but I kind of felt like, oh, this is irresistible. Like, how could anyone say no to this? And I'll just live in Austen's world. I'll live in the world of Pride and Prejudice for like 2 or 3 years. And even at that point, I was writing my book Sisterland, which I think is a kind of anxious book. And I kind of felt like, oh, I'll be writing toward a happy ending. And so it did just seem fun. And it seemed like, sort of like one of the reasons that I like writing is that it is this creative project. And it felt like this is a creative project that someone else gave to me.
Hi there. I'm a not guilty pleasure, not chick reader. And I've loved all of them. But especially I enjoyed American Wife and Rodham. So my question is, of the post-Hillary first ladies, if you had to choose one to write about, which one and how would you treat them?
Okay, I think that's like a little bit of a trick question. So I will say I love Michelle Obama's Becoming, and I kind of feel like it's so. I mean, interestingly, I wrote my own Laura Bush memoir before Laura Bush wrote her memoir, but Michelle Obama, beat me to her. No, but like I feel like it's so comprehensive, and it's actually so much more personal and open than most memoirs. So I don't think. Like I really respect. I mean, like everyone, I love Michelle Obama, and I also respect how candid she is. And so it's almost like in some ways fiction can explore, like what, I mean, it can kind of be like, oh, we're in the bathroom with that person, we're in the bedroom with that person, or whatever. And it's like, but you don't really need to, like I think so. And then I'm not going to write a Melania novel. So
It wasn't a trick, honestly.
It was no. There's a first lady from like the semi-distant past that I can see writing a novel about, but I'm not. Which would be like my first historical. I mean, I guess it depends on your definition of history, but like, 'cause of course, now today with the students, who did I ask them if they'd heard of, and none of them. Bush, and I think maybe out of how many people were there, like 100 or something, so maybe 1 or 2 or 3 were like they'd heard the words Laura Bush, and I was like, well, once there was a president named George W. Bush. But anyway, so that to them I'm sure would be historical fiction, but there's someone even more historical fiction.
All right, well, that is the Q&A portion. Thank you all. We're going to do a book signing now, but I just want to say thank you. This has been fabulous, enjoyable, super fun. And over to you. Yeah.
Yep. So we're going to do book signing now. So if anyone wants to get their book signed, we're going to start the line here, and it's going to go down the middle aisle. And we're going to hand out pencils and Post-it notes if you want your book personalized.
We're going to go over there. That was super fun.
You made it so fun and easy.
I loved it.
Delightful. Yeah, that was
I loved it.